The dust hung thick in the afternoon air of Redemption Creek, turning the sunlight honeygold as it filtered through the makeshift auction platform in the town square. The wooden stage creaked under the weight of desperation, 23 souls lined up like cattle, each carrying the particular shame of poverty in a land that promised everything to those brave enough to claim it. She stood third from the end, swaying slightly. Her name was Caroline Webb, though no one had asked. 22 years old, with auburn hair that had once shone like copper pennies but now hung limp and tangled beneath a faded bonnet. Her dress, if it could be called that, was a patchwork of mismatched fabrics, but the skirt was peculiar. Enormous. Gathered and bunched around her waist with what looked like every scrap of cloth she could find, it billowed around her legs like a strange bell, hiding everything from waist to ankle. She kept one hand pressed against her stomach. The other gripped the rough wood of the auction post. Lot 17. The auctioneer's voice cracked across the square like a whip. Samuel Hutchins was a man who enjoyed his work too much, his red face gleaming with sweat and satisfaction. Young woman, able-bodied, well, mostly able-bodied. Laughter rippled through the crowd. 30, maybe 40 people had gathered to watch the monthly auction, farmers seeking workers, merchants needing help, and those who simply came for the entertainment of watching the desperate sell themselves for survival. Caroline lifted her chin, but her legs trembled visibly. Her face was the color of old parchment, and a thin sheen of sweat covered her forehead despite the cool October air. "She don't look so good, Sam," someone called from the crowd. "Maybe she's got the fever." Hutchins squinted at her, stepping closer. His boots thudded on the wooden platform as he circled her like a buyer examining a horse. "You sick, girl?" "No, sir." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Speak up. Nobody's gonna bid on a mumbler." "I'm not sick, sir." Louder this time, but her voice cracked at the end. "Could have fooled me. You look like death warmed over." Hutchins grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. She stumbled, nearly falling, and a gasp escaped her lips. "See? Weak as a kitten. But she's young enough, and I suppose if you keep her fed, she might be worth something for light housework." Caroline's vision swam. Dark spots danced at the edges of her sight. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten, yesterday morning, maybe? A handful of stale bread someone had thrown away behind the hotel. But the hunger wasn't what was making her weak. The pain had started 3 hours ago. Low and deep, like something breaking apart inside her. She'd known what it meant immediately. "Let's start the bidding at $5. Hutchins announced. Silence. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few men whispered to each other, shaking their heads. $5 was too much for a woman who looked like she might collapse before sundown. For dollars? Hutchins tried again, his showmanship faltering. "Come now, gentlemen. For dollars for a year's labor." More silence. Caroline felt the shame burn through her chest, hotter than the pain. She'd known she looked bad. There was no hiding 3 days of sleeping behind the livery stable and 9 months of struggling to find enough food for two. But hearing the silence, feeling the rejection in the air like something solid and suffocating, it was worse than she'd imagined. $3. $2, then. Surely someone. $1. The voice came from the back. Slurred and thick with whiskey. Caroline's head snapped up, her heart dropping into her stomach like a stone down a well. Jacob Thornton pushed through the crowd, grinning with brown-stained teeth. The town drunk, a man whose reputation for cruelty was matched only by his reputation for spending every cent he had on rot-gut whiskey and poker games. He was maybe 50, with a bloated face and hands that shook unless they were wrapped around a bottle. $1, he repeated, louder this time. "Hell, I'll pay $2 if she can cook." The crowd laughed, but it was an uncomfortable sound. Even in Redemption Creek, where the auction system was accepted as necessary survival, there were lines. And everyone knew what a man like Thornton wanted with a young woman purchased for $1. Caroline's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the post with both hands, her oversized skirt swaying violently with the motion. Please, she whispered. Not to Hutchins. Not to the crowd. To God, maybe, or to the universe that had brought her to this moment. Please, not him. Hutchins hesitated. Even he had standards, apparently, because he glanced at Thornton with something like distaste. But business was business, and an auction with no bids was an auction that made the town council question whether Samuel Hutchins should keep his position. $1, Hutchins said slowly, for lot 17. Going once. Caroline closed her eyes. Another wave of pain rolled through her abdomen, stronger this time. She bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood. Going twice. The baby shifted inside her. Except it wasn't inside anymore, was it? She could feel the weight of it, impossibly low, pressing against the cloth bindings she'd wrapped around her thighs that morning when she'd realized today would be the day. $10. The voice cut through the square like a knife through butter, quiet, but with an edge that made everyone stop and listen. Caroline's eyes flew open. He stood at the edge of the crowd, separate from them in a way that had nothing to do with physical distance. Tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block the sun. He wore a simple brown coat over a faded blue shirt, work pants tucked into scuffed leather boots. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but she could see the hard line of his jaw, the set of his mouth. The crowd parted for him as he walked forward. "Did you say $10, Mr. Garrett?" Hutchins sounded shocked. "I did." The man, Garrett, stopped at the base of the platform. He didn't climb up. Didn't move closer to Caroline. Just stood there, looking up at Hutchins with an expression that betrayed nothing. That's very generous, sir." "Very generous indeed." Hutchins recovered quickly, his auctioneer's smile returning. $10. "We have $10 for lot 17. Going once, going twice." 15, Thornton snarled from the back. "I bid $15. A murmur ran through the crowd. $15 was real money, more than most of these people paid for a full year of labor. Thornton had to be drunk to bid that much. Or desperate for something Caroline didn't want to think about. Garrett didn't turn around. Didn't even acknowledge Thornton's bid. He simply said, $25. The murmur became gasps. Hutchins's mouth fell open. $25, Mr. Garrett, are you certain?" "Sold," Garrett said flatly. It wasn't a question. Hutchins scrambled to recover his composure. $25. Going once, going twice, sold. Lot 17 to Mr. James Garrett. He slammed his gavel down with unnecessary force, as if afraid Garrett might change his mind. Caroline's knees buckled. She caught herself against the post, but barely. $25. She'd just been purchased for $25 by a man she'd never seen before, a man whose face she couldn't even properly see beneath that hat. But at least he wasn't Thornton. Garrett climbed the platform steps slowly, his boots making solid, deliberate sounds against the wood. He reached her in 3 strides, and this close, Caroline could finally see his face. Hard. That was the first word that came to mind. Not cruel, there was a difference, but weathered and closed off. Like a door that had been locked for so long the key no longer fit. He might have been 40, or 50, or anywhere in between. His eyes were grey, the color of storm clouds, and they swept over her with an assessment that was clinical rather than leering. "Can you walk?" His voice was low, meant only for her. Yes, sir." "Then come on." He didn't touch her. Didn't offer his arm or take her hand. Just turned and walked back down the steps, clearly expecting her to follow. Caroline forced her legs to move. Each step sent fire through her pelvis, and the weight between her thighs shifted dangerously. She'd bound the baby tight, so tight, using strips torn from her only other dress and an old bedsheet she'd found in the trash. But bindings could only do so much. The crowd watched as she descended the steps. Some faces showed pity. Others showed curiosity. A few showed the kind of knowing smirks that made her want to disappear into the dust itself. She made it to the ground. Took 5 steps. 10. On the 15th step, her shoe squelched. Caroline froze, horror washing over her in a cold wave. She looked down. Her boots, ancient, cracked leather things 3 sizes too big, were soaked. Dark liquid pooled in the dust around her feet. Blood. Not much. Not enough for most people to notice in the chaos of the dispersing crowd. But enough that she could see it. Enough that she knew. Garrett had stopped several paces ahead. He turned back when he realized she was no longer following. His eyes went to her feet. To the dark stains spreading in the pale dust. To the way she stood frozen, one hand pressed against her enormous skirt, the other reaching out for balance she couldn't find. His expression didn't change. Not exactly. But something shifted behind those gray eyes, a recognition, maybe, or a calculation. He walked back to her. "You're hurt." Not a question. "I'm fine, sir. I can work. I promise I can." "You're bleeding." "It's nothing. Her voice broke. Tears burned in her eyes, and she hated herself for them. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry. Not today. Not in front of strangers. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she didn't expect. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "My wagon's at the livery," he said quietly. "Can you make it that far?" Caroline nodded, not trusting her voice. The livery stable was only 50 yards away, but it might as well have been 50 miles. Every step was agony. Every movement made the bindings shift and the weight between her legs press harder against already traumatized flesh. Halfway there, another contraction hit. She stopped, gasping, doubling over. Garrett's hand caught her elbow. The first time he'd touched her. His grip was firm but not rough, steadying her until the wave of pain passed. "Almost there," he said. His wagon was plain, a simple flatbed with wooden sides, pulled by 2 chestnut horses that looked better fed than half the people in town. He lifted her into the seat with surprising gentleness, his hands under her arms, careful not to jostle her too much. Then he climbed up beside her, took the reins, and clicked his tongue to the horses. They rolled out of town in silence. Caroline tried to focus on staying upright, on breathing through the pain, on anything other than what she knew was coming. The road, barely more than a rutted path, wound through scrub grass and scattered cottonwood trees. Garrett's ranch, wherever it was, clearly wasn't close to town. 15 minutes passed. 20. "How far?" she managed to ask. "Another mile." She nodded, closing her eyes. "Another mile." She could last another mile. The baby shifted again. Lower. So low now that Caroline knew with absolute certainty that there was no stopping what was happening. She'd given birth on that auction platform. While Hutchins was mocking her. While the crowd was laughing. While Thornton was bidding $1 for the right to own her. She'd given birth, and she'd felt the baby slip free into the bindings between her thighs, and she'd somehow stayed standing while her body tore itself apart. And now this man, this stranger who'd paid $25 for reasons she couldn't fathom, was taking her to his ranch, and she was going to have to tell him. Or maybe she wouldn't have to tell him. Maybe she could just handle it. Somehow. The cabin appeared over a small rise, a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney, a covered porch, and a small barn set back about 30 yards. Neat. Well-maintained. Lonely. Garrett pulled the wagon up close to the porch steps and climbed down. He came around to her side and offered his hand. Caroline took it because she had no choice. Her legs felt like water as she tried to stand. The moment her weight shifted forward, she knew it was a mistake. Her knees gave out completely. Garrett caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist as she collapsed against his chest. "Sorry," she gasped. "I'm sorry, I just..." "Don't apologize." He actually lifted her, cradling her like a child, and carried her toward the cabin. "You're burning up with fever." She wasn't, but she didn't have the energy to argue. The world swayed and tilted. The pain was constant now, a grinding ache that spread from her pelvis through her entire lower body. The cabin door swung open. Inside was clean and sparse, a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a corner that served as a kitchen, and a single door that probably led to a bedroom. Garrett carried her straight to that door, kicked it open, and laid her on a bed with a patchwork quilt. "I'm going to get water," he said. "Don't try to stand." He left, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Caroline lay there, staring at the ceiling beams, and tried to think. She had to tell him. She had to. But how did you tell a man you'd just met, a man who'd just paid $25 for a year of your labor, that you'd hidden a newborn baby under your skirt? That you'd given birth in public and hadn't made a sound? That you were lying in his bed bleeding and broken with an infant strapped to your thighs? The baby hadn't cried. Not once. That scared her more than anything else. She reached down, pressing her hand against the bulge in her skirt. Through the layers of cloth and binding, she could feel warmth. The faintest flutter of movement. Alive. Still alive. Garrett returned with a basin of water and clean cloths. He set them on a small table beside the bed, then stood there looking down at her with those unreadable grey eyes. "You need to tell me what's wrong," he said. "I'm just tired, sir. If you'll let me rest. You're bleeding badly enough that you left a trail from the wagon to the house." His voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath now. "So I'll ask again. What's wrong?" Caroline's breath hitched. Tears spilled over, running down into her hair. "Please," she whispered. "Just do whatever you paid for, sir. I won't fight you. I won't make a sound. But please, please don't lift my skirt." Garrett went very still. For a long moment, he just stared at her, and she couldn't read his expression at all. Then he moved to the foot of the bed, his eyes on her boots. The blood was more visible now. It had soaked through her stockings, what remained of them, and was spreading across the quilt. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said slowly. "But you're going to die if I don't see what's wrong." "No. Please, you can't." He crouched down, his hands reaching for the hem of her enormous skirt. "No." Caroline tried to sit up, tried to push his hands away, but she was too weak. "Please, sir, please don't." Garrett lifted the skirt. And stopped. His hands froze, still holding the fabric. His face went blank with shock. For 3 full seconds. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then he carefully, slowly, lifted the skirt higher. The bindings were soaked red. Strips of cloth wound around her thighs in crude, desperate layers, tied so tight they'd left angry marks on her skin. And in the center, bundled against her inner thigh. A baby. Tiny. Impossibly tiny. Covered in blood and vernix and still connected by a thick, bluish cord that disappeared up into Caroline's body. The baby's eyes were closed. Its skin was mottled, somewhere between purple and pink. One miniature hand had worked free of the bindings and lay curled against Caroline's leg. Garrett made a sound, low and choked, like he'd been punched in the stomach. "I'm sorry," Caroline sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't give birth on the street. I couldn't go to the doctor. I couldn't." "When?" Garrett's voice was hoarse. "During the auction. While people were," she couldn't finish. Couldn't say the words. "While people were laughing at me. While Thornton was bidding. While the whole town watched and no one knew." Garrett set the skirt down gently, covering the baby again. Then he stood, walked to a cabinet on the far wall, and opened it with shaking hands. He pulled out a bottle of whiskey, a knife, and clean thread. "Have you done this before?" Caroline asked desperately. "Do you know how to?" My wife. The words came out flat. Dead. She died 2 years ago. Childbirth. The baby died too. He returned to the bed, setting his supplies on the table. I know what to do. He poured whiskey over the knife blade, his movements mechanical. Practiced. Like he'd rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times, waiting for a chance at redemption that had never come. Until now. This is going to hurt, he said. The cutting won't, the cord doesn't have nerves, but afterwards, I need to deliver the placenta, and that. I know. Caroline's voice was surprisingly steady. I know it will hurt. Garrett nodded. He lifted her skirt again, more carefully this time, and began unwinding the bindings. The baby lay against her thigh, still and silent. Too silent. Is she? Caroline couldn't finish. Garrett corrected quietly. You have a son. He leaned closer, his ear near the baby's face. And his breathing. The relief was so intense it was physically painful. Garrett's hands moved with surprising gentleness as he freed the baby from the bindings. The infant was smaller than any newborn Caroline had ever seen, barely 5 pounds, if that. But his chest rose and fell in tiny, fluttering breaths. Hold him, Garrett said, lifting the baby carefully, mindful of the cord still connecting him to Caroline's body. He placed the infant on her chest, the bloody, precious weight of him settling against her heart. The baby's eyes opened. Dark blue, unfocused, searching. Caroline's arms came up instinctively, cradling him. Hi, she whispered. Hi, baby. I'm your mama. The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a mewling kitten. His hand found her finger and gripped it with surprising strength. Garrett watched them for a moment, something unreadable crossing his face. Then he picked up the knife. I need you to hold very still, he said. Caroline nodded, her eyes fixed on her son's face. The cutting took less than a minute. Garrett's hands were steady, his movements confident. He tied off the cord in 2 places with clean thread, then severed it between the knots with one quick slice. The baby was separate now. His own person. No longer connected to Caroline's body by anything except love. Now the hard part, Garrett said. He set the knife aside and placed one hand low on Caroline's abdomen. When I press, you need to push. Like you did before. I didn't push before. Caroline's voice was thin. I couldn't. People would have known. Garrett's jaw tightened. Then this will be harder than it should be. Ready? She wasn't. But she nodded anyway. The next 10 minutes were a blur of pain and pressure and Garrett's quiet voice giving instructions. Push. Breathe. Again. The placenta came free in pieces, and Garrett examined each one carefully to make sure nothing was left inside. When it was finally done, Caroline lay gasping on the bed, her son still clutched to her chest. Garrett cleaned her as best he could, his touch clinical and impersonal. Then he took the baby gently from her arms. I need to wash him, he said. And you need to rest. Don't take him. I'm not taking him. I'm washing him. There's a difference. He carried the baby to the basin of water, fresh water, still clean, and began wiping away the blood and birth matter with gentle, practiced movements. Caroline watched through heavy-lidded eyes. Watched this stranger, this man who'd paid $25 for her labor, carefully clean her newborn son. Watched him wrap the baby in a soft flannel shirt that was far too big, creating a makeshift swaddle. You did this before, she said. With your baby. I tried. Garrett's voice was quiet. She lived for 10 minutes. My wife lived for an hour. He finished swaddling the baby and brought him back to Caroline. 10 minutes, and then they were both gone. And I was left with all this knowledge of how to care for a newborn and no one to use it on. He placed the baby in Caroline's arms again. Their son, her son, looked almost peaceful now, clean and wrapped warmly, his eyes drifting closed. "You just bought yourself a family, not a slave," Caroline whispered. It was the first honest thing she'd said since meeting him. Garrett stood beside the bed, looking down at them both. A woman who'd given birth during an auction and hidden her baby for hours out of sheer desperation. A newborn who shouldn't have survived but had. A family he'd never expected, offered to him by a girl who had nothing else to give. "I just got the answer to 2 years of prayers," he said finally. The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw and full of a grief Caroline was only beginning to understand. Garrett turned away, walked to the corner of the room, and pulled aside a cloth that had been draped over something in the shadows. A cradle. It was beautiful, handmade, carved from light pine, with delicate scrollwork along the sides. A labor of love. A promise of a future that had never materialized. He carried it to the bedside and set it down gently. "My wife picked out the wood," he said. "I spent 3 months carving it while she was pregnant. After she died, I couldn't bear to look at it. Couldn't bear to get rid of it either. So I covered it up and tried to pretend it didn't exist." He reached out and ran one calloused hand along the cradle's edge. 2 years of dust came away on his fingers. But now, he looked at Caroline, then at the baby in her arms. Now it finally has a purpose. Caroline's throat tightened. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why did you bid on me? You didn't know about the baby. You couldn't have known." "No." Garrett sat down in the chair beside the bed, suddenly looking exhausted. "I didn't know about the baby. But I saw a young woman standing on that platform, trying so hard not to collapse. And I saw the way Thornton was looking at you. And I thought maybe God was giving me a chance to do something right. To save someone, even if I couldn't save my own family." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, I didn't expect the answer to be this literal." Despite everything, the pain, the fear, the exhaustion, Caroline felt a small, fragile laugh escape her lips. "I think God has a strange sense of humor." "That he does." The baby stirred in Caroline's arms, making that small mewling sound again. Without thinking, she brought him to her breast. He latched immediately, nursing with the fierce determination of someone who'd been waiting hours for this moment. Garrett looked away, giving them privacy. "What's your name?" Caroline asked quietly. "Your full name?" "James Samuel Garrett. Most people just call me Garrett." "James," Caroline repeated. "That's a good name. Strong. What's yours?" "Your full name." "Caroline Ann Webb." She looked down at her son. "And this is. She realized, with a jolt, that she hadn't thought about names. Hadn't let herself think that far ahead. The entire pregnancy had been about survival, finding food, hiding her condition, making it to the next day. Names seemed like a luxury for people who had futures. But now she had a future. "Maybe. I don't know what to call him," she admitted. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "Then, my son's name was going to be Thomas. Thomas James Garrett. We never got to use it." Caroline looked up at him. Saw the grief still etched in every line of his face. But underneath it, something new. Something that looked almost like hope. "Thomas," she said softly. "Thomas James. I think that's perfect." Garrett's expression cracked, just for a second. He turned away quickly, but not before Caroline saw the moisture in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. Outside, the sun was setting. Golden light streamed through the cabin windows, painting everything in warm amber tones. In the distance, a bird called out, a mourning dove, its song both melancholy and beautiful. Caroline looked down at Thomas, nursing peacefully in her arms. Looked at the cradle beside the bed, empty for 2 years and now waiting to be filled. Looked at James Garrett, sitting with his back to her, shoulders tight with emotions he couldn't express. She'd woken up that morning expecting to be sold to the highest bidder. Expected to spend the next year, or the rest of her life, as someone's property, working until she dropped dead in a field somewhere. Instead, she'd given birth in public without anyone knowing. Been purchased by a widower who'd lost everything. And now lay in a warm bed with her son in her arms and a hand-carved cradle waiting beside her. "Mr. Garrett," she said quietly. He turned back to face her. "I don't have $25 to pay you back. I don't have anything at all. But I promise I'll work hard. I'll earn my keep. I'll take care of your house and cook your meals and do whatever you need. I won't be a burden." Garrett shook his head slowly. "I don't want your labor, Caroline. I want—" He stopped, struggling with the words. "My wife's name was Sarah. And for 2 years, this house has been so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the walls. I want what you said before. A family. If you'll have me." Caroline's breath caught. "You mean? Not today. Not even soon. I'm not asking you to marry me out of obligation." He met her eyes directly. "But someday, if you're willing. I'd like Thomas to have a father. And I'd like you to have a husband who'll protect you. Who'll make sure you never have to stand on an auction platform again." Tears spilled down Caroline's cheeks. "I'd like that," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." Garrett nodded. Then he stood and walked to the door. "I'll let you rest," he said. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Caroline lay in the growing darkness, listening to Thomas's small breathing, feeling the weight of him in her arms. Outside, she could hear Garrett moving around, starting a fire in the stove, setting up for dinner, beginning the evening chores. Ordinary sounds. Domestic sounds. The sounds of a home. And for the first time in 9 months, maybe for the first time in her entire life, Caroline felt safe. Thomas finished nursing and fell asleep against her chest, his tiny face peaceful. Caroline carefully placed him in the cradle, tucking Garrett's flannel shirt around him like a blanket. The cradle rocked gently, finally holding the child it was always meant to hold. Caroline closed her eyes and let exhaustion take her, pulling her down into dreamless sleep. When she woke the next morning, there was fresh bread on the bedside table, still warm. A cup of water. And sitting in the chair where Garrett had sat the night before was a small bouquet of wildflowers in a tin cup. From outside came the sound of an axe striking wood. Steady. Rhythmic. The sound of a man building something. Caroline smiled, reaching down to rock Thomas's cradle. They were home.